Hello, Bill.
Good morning, Matt.
Welcome to the DMZ, everybody.
Did you have a festive Memorial Day?
We did it perfectly, man. We went up. The wife and I got away from the kids and went to New York on Saturday to do an SC Cup show,
as our veterans would have wanted.
And and then we made it back Sunday afternoon and spent a day and a half with the kids at the pool, and we got great weather here in your nation's capital, and so it was a good.
Did you grill yourself?
What's that?
Did you grill yourself?
My wife. See, I don't cook indoors or outdoors. It's a thing where somehow it's manly to cook outdoors, I guess. My wife is an amazing cook, and she made all. We got these Wagyu. This is totally blue collar right here, Bill. Wagyu beef hot dogs, which I highly recommend. Very nice.
Do they taste like a real hot dog?
They taste like, you know what they tasted like? You know how good a hot dog tastes at a baseball park?
Yeah.
Like better than a hot dog you would make yourself. It tasted like a real ballpark hot dog.
Okay. I'll take your word. I'm not totally convinced.
It wasn't too gourmet or fancy. I think you would like it.
But a grilled hot dog is what a hot dog should be grilled.
Ah, it was amazing.
Well, I had a hot dog on Memorial Day. It was on Memorial Day. So Memorial Day is always around my oldest daughter's birthday. So she turned 10. Very exciting.
That's big.
And we took her and a few friends to indoor trampoline place. And Mass Live, which is a Massachusetts news site, part of the trend of online local news sites that do not a ton of investigative reporting, but have a lot of listicles. They and a lot of food contests. So last year they had what's the best hot dog in Massachusetts, and they do a reader poll, and they have the judges go out and test the top 10 reader choices and make their judgment. So this was rated the top hot dog in Massachusetts. Cindy's Drive-In in Granby, Massachusetts. And Granby is about a half hour east of me, and a town that went for Trump by about 15 votes.
Wow. In liberal Massachusetts. That's big.
And I knew I had entered into Trump country on my way there when I saw the house with the Confederate flag on the flagpole.
Nice.
Having said that, Cindy's Drive-In, the real deal, pink neon sign, grilled hot dogs, burgers, curly fries, 100 soft serve flavors.
There's something great about bad food. Have you ever had, Bill, I know you go to bowling alleys all the time.
Yeah.
The bowling alley food is great. It's amazingly good.
Well, the bowling alley...
I think it's the ashes from the cigarette that the cook is smoking at the time that adds the flavor.
Well, I try to stick to candlepin bowling, and the two candlepin alleys near me do not have kitchens.
Is this is not? There's duckpin and king.
Duckpin and candlepin are different, similar but different. And so they both have the small ball.
Okay.
But the duck pin, the pins are more shaped like regular bowling pins, but shorter and stubbier. They still have that bulge at the bottom, which makes duck pin a much easier game than candlepin. Candlepin, they're just straight sticks. So you don't get a lot of pin action on candlepin, which makes it harder, but it's a great equalizer. Everybody is equally bad at candlepin. And there has never been... in the history of candlepin, no one has ever bowled a perfect game. No one has ever bowled a 300 in candlepin.
That's amazing.
So candlepin, I think, is the true bowling, but I cannot get bowling alley food at the Alex Ryan. So you have to
go a half hour away to eat these foot-long hot dogs.
Yeah, that's right. So I had a good grilled foot-long at Cindy's Drive-In. I recommend. And my older daughter will only eat hot dogs. My younger daughter will only eat hamburgers. And they both, got what they needed at Cindy's Drive-In.
Now, listen, I know that you're more of a bowling fan than a baseball fan, but since you're up there in Massachusetts, I did want to get your take on the Bill Buckner, if you heard about his passing and the controversy of his legacy.
I do have a thought on Bill Buckner, and while I am in Red Sox Nation, I'm born and bred New Yorker, so and I never took sides between Yankees and Mets. I was for whoever New York team was good at the time. And so one of my fondest childhood memories is
Mookie
Game
Wilson
6.
dribbling.
That was a beautiful day. That was a beautiful day. I thought the Mets deserved it, and I always hated the Boston Red Sox, so everything fell into place. And this year, not too long ago, Ron Darling, who was the pitcher for the '86 Mets, he put out a memoir where he said that I think it was Game 6. I think it was one of the earlier games that the Mets won. That Lenny Dykstra rattled Oil Can Boyd. Lenny Dykstra was on the Mets. Oil Can Boyd was. I
think is Dykstra a conservative? I think.
Well, Dykstra is at least a criminal. He was convicted for grand theft auto. So
maybe that's what I was saying. In the Trump era, the two things are very. I assume one leads to the other.
Right.
But Dykstra played for the Pirates, I think, too. And
Phillies,
okay.
And so Darling said that Dykstra was heckling Oil Can Boyd.
And not to interrupt you again, but Oil Can, an amazing nickname.
Awesome nickname, absolutely.
Yeah.
Dykstra rattled him with a racist tirade from the dugout, and that the other Mets, cheered him on. No one scolded Dykstra for trying to rattle Oil Can Boyd with racial epithets, and that helped fire up the team. So from there, you already have the Mets' victory sullied, knowing it was fueled by racism, and Bill Buckner, as I was just reading, there's a really good New York Times remembrance of Buckner. I mean, Buckner not only was a hitting champ, 2,700 hits, one-time All-Star, very long career. He was, towards the tail end of his career in '86, and he was being propped up by cornerstone shots. I mean, he was creaky, but he was trying to, squeeze out every inch of baseball that he had in him and bring his expertise to the game.
And this is an extra innings, right, at this point. So he's probably played. All right, I won't. Let's put a pin in that one. We'll play this one in protest, but I believe it was late in the game. I know that.
Yeah, definitely late in the game. Okay. And so he might have misplayed the ball because he was literally like a hobbled player, but trying to live the spirit of the game. And he was far from the only person on the team to have made a mistake in that series. There was a wild pitch, before then,
When that wasn't even the decisive game.
It wasn't they had the lead in Game 7 and they lost that lead. So the fact that a guy was playing with grit, and, made one mistake at the tail end of his career, that should somehow color his entire career is obviously abhorrent. He was far more of a representative of what the game should be than Lenny freaking Dykstra. So my whole memory of '86 is completely, subverted and destroyed.
Well, no, I think it's good to revisit these things and see it from a different perspective. It's very healthy, and it's good that you're doing this. But there is all a metaphor too, right, for how someone could live an entire life or have an entire career and be defined by one mistake made when the cameras are on and everyone's watching. And it's really unfortunate. And it still made it, I believe, in the first sentence of his obituary. That is a big part of his legacy, despite the fact that it was one moment out of a long career that was very successful.
Now, around the same time as Bill Buckner died, so did Edmund Morris.
Oh, I didn't hear about this.
Edmund Morris, the biographer. And we've talked about him on a past show, I believe. And he won the Pulitzer for one of the books in his trilogy on Teddy Roosevelt, which is just majestic. I mean,
Theodore Rex, I think.
Well, I think the Pulitzer for The Rise of Theodore Roosevelt, which was the first one.
Okay. Oh, you're right.
Theodore Rex was the second one, and Colonel Roosevelt was the third. If you're going to read like one thing with Teddy Roosevelt, you should read his trilogy. It is just fantastic, and his writing style. I mean, the guy loves dropping in the $50 words, but he does it but he does it in a way that's not forced. The whole thing just flows wonderfully. And if he should be remembered for one thing, it should be that was the one he got the Pulitzer for. But the obits were mostly about the Reagan biography, Dutch, which our common friend Carl Cannon is not a fan of, because his dad wrote another excellent. He wrote a Reagan trilogy. This is the third of the trilogy, Role of a Lifetime, and I most certainly recommend Lou Cannon's work on Reagan. But Morris got the authorized biography. He was tapped by Reagan because the first Theodore Roosevelt book was such a success. He hadn't even written the two books of Roosevelt yet. He put Theodore Roosevelt on hold for over a decade because Reagan asked him to be his official biographer with first person access in the White House. And he spends years in the White House, and he finds him a maddening figure to capture, because he seems to live in this gray area between truth, reality, and embellished fiction in his head. And so he constructs the biography to be quasi-fictional, with Edmund Morris putting himself in the book as a fictionalized Edmund Morris, who is present at various points of Reagan's life, speaking as a first-hand narrator, even though that's made up, except for the parts where it's not made up, and he's actually in the White House in his later year, and so it's not constructed at all like a traditional biography. And the fact that there's like a couple of scenes where like more fictionalized Morris and Reagan are actually interacting, which didn't happen, and so this made and there's certain parts of the book which are unflattering to Reagan. I wouldn't say the entirety is unflattering. I think by and large it's meant to be a positive portrayal of Reagan, but because there are unflattering parts, the Reagan partisans completely trashed it and used this unorthodox device as the way to trash it, and whether or not you agree with his use of the device, he was physically present at times. He did have direct injuries to Reagan, and so there's just certain stuff in the book that is, unique to that book that you're not going to get other places.
I feel like the Buckner analogy doesn't hold, though, because with Buckner, it's a split-second error that Buckner made, as you mentioned, while hobbled. With Morris, the decision to invent fictional characters is something that he had years to contemplate and could have talked to people and still decided to do that. And so, the one thing they both have in common is that rather than remember their triumph, that they're largely both men are largely defined by a mistake they made. I just think in Buckner's case, it's much more excusable than in Morris's case.
No, I grant you that they're not perfect parallels. In Buckner's case, it was sort of the mistake was the outgrowth of his grit, the fact that he was pushing himself so far to be to stay in the game. But so it's not quite parallel, but I think Morris was he was not a traditional political biographer. He always said he didn't really care about politics. He cared about characters and stories and narrative. And he had other biographies. He's got Thomas Edison biography that's going to come out posthumously. He had a Beethoven biography. Not that I've read these, but I know he was not strictly focused on politics, but he spent so long on both Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, you're talking decades of work on just Reagan and Teddy Roosevelt that he's known for that, and that he had this unique perspective on writing. That he's much more of a writer than a traditional biographer, led him to make that choice, and it was a career-defining choice. But should that have taken up 75% of the New York Times obit, or should we talk about how he captured Teddy Roosevelt? I mean, it's easier to talk about Reagan because it was so unusual. Like, what do you have to say about Teddy? He wrote a good book on Teddy Roosevelt,
But I mean, again, this is like the larger point is that it's not just these two men who happen to die at the same time, but we can be defined. Like you or I could be defined by our worst moment, potentially.
Probably on this show.
And is that fair? Should we be defining people based on their worst moment if it happens to be captured on camera?
Should I be defined by it's going to be Hillary versus Jeb article? I say no, Matt. I should not be defined by that.
Well, that's why we need people fighting for us to try to spin the narrative posthumously. We need Reaganauts who are out there. I need Craig Shirley. I want him pushing for the Matt Lewis legacy.
Now, if the audience hasn't figured out, we are procrastinating from actually talking about the politics of the day.
Well, sooner or later, if we keep talking, Robert Mueller is going to have a press conference.
Right. We're at 10 a.m. Wednesday morning, so we're not speaking knowing what Mueller is going to say. So apologies if we're not as fresh as we'd like to be. But let's get back to 2020 and the Democrats, since we don't know what's going to happen from Mueller. And the race has not shifted in any kind of dramatic way early in the past month. It's interesting that Biden had his rollout. It's been a month. Kamala had a good rollout in January, and she got a bump in the polls at the time, but it didn't last. Bernie had a good rollout in February, got a bump, didn't last. I mean, I think it lasted for a time, but then when Biden came in, that got blown apart. But Biden's lead has generally held in most polling. I think there's one Iowa poll where I saw a tie. So there's some question.
But there is an excitement gap, Bill.
There is an excitement.
Crowd may not be big enough.
Well, you are saying, I think that there's a trickle of stories that his crowds aren't big enough, and his campaign schedule is on the light side, and his policy haven't really been rolled out yet. I'm sort of trying to where are the holes to poke here? This can't just be a boring wire to wire Biden story. There must be some possibility that he's going to trip up.
I think I'm writing about this, and I've been looking up. And while it's true that winners tend to turn out really big crowds, so do losers. Mm-hmm. I found a rally in 2004 in Philadelphia where John Kerry with Bill Clinton got 100,000 people to turn out.
Yeah, and they had a Bruce Springsteen rally in 2004. I think it was in Ohio. That was enormous.
Kerry had big. Palin had huge crowds.
Well, Bernie had this enormous crowd in New York City in the 2016 New York primary, and everyone thought this was going to be the turn where he was going to stick it to Hillary in her home state of New York, and that didn't prove out either. In 2000, Nader, his whole campaign is based on the super rallies. 20,000 at Madison Square Garden, a few other ones. This shows that the grassroots groundswell is coming. Now, of course, it was enough to, take a bite out of Gore, Florida, but the actual numbers that he got were pretty small. Crowd size can be a very misleading metric because it's just.
I feel like it's like Moneyball. Like, it's the kind of thing, before Moneyball and all the analytics, it wasn't just scouts who talked about how pretty a swing was. It was also sports writers, And I think that for journalists, a crowd is still like, wow, there are a lot of people here. He must have momentum. Right. It's like in a campaign, which many, many years ago, Bill, in my previous life, I used to do at a pretty small level, the sign wars.
Yeah.
Your candidates believe that whoever has the most yard signs is going to win.
Yeah.
And it really doesn't correlate usually.
Right. And I'd say it here locally, people definitely. I mean, we don't have local race. You don't have polls, so people count the signs, and of course, that's why who has what sign.
Yes.
You can gossip about that at the local level the way you can't in a bigger race, but I I think that with all that, I do think Biden does have to worry about Iowa. There's definitely, you look at the Iowa polling that exists, he is softer in Iowa than New Hampshire or South Carolina. So there's 4 early states: Iowa, New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina. Iowa and Nevada are caucuses, and New Hampshire and South Carolina are primaries. So the 2 primary states, Biden seems stronger, and South Carolina is the one with the most diverse population, and Biden is doing very well with African Americans, at least as of this moment. So he's doing very, very well there. So Iowa is a caucus state, white state, and traditionally, caucuses are lower turnout affairs that tend to be more disproportionately ideological. People are willing to show up for a 2-hour affair, not folks who are just going to punch a ballot on the way to work in the morning. So that suggests Biden has a tougher road there. And if he didn't win Iowa, even though you could say, well, it just wasn't his state, it would severely puncture the inevitability question. I mean, his whole premise is that he's the most electable. He loses the first contest.
Well, and then the other, this whole thing is dynamic. That's the most important thing for people to understand. That you can't say, well, I'm gonna win South Carolina. Well, but what if Kamala were to win Iowa, she probably wins South Carolina.
It would certainly help her immensely.
It changes everything. It doesn't just impact. It's not just does Biden lose Iowa. It's how badly does he lose and who wins.
Right.
Who wins Iowa.
Right.
Because it will shift everything. So I think you're right about that. I'm not that worried about the crowd sizes. I'd be much more worried about those early states.
Now, the other complicating factor in Iowa that's going to be hard for the candidates and hard for all of us on the outside trying to analyze things and hard for the pollsters is that the Iowa Democrats changed their caucus rules. So there's going to be opportunity to vote remotely and not have to go stand in the gymnasium for 2 hours.
What?
Yeah.
How is this not a bigger story?
Because there's so many stories.
I didn't hear about this.
So
this is a game changer.
Yes, because it's totally a game changer.
And it's a game changer for a variety of reasons. I mean, obviously, in terms of turnout, getting people to show up and stay there and hang around. But the other thing is persuasion. There are people who go to the caucuses and are persuaded. Right. They give speeches.
Well, Iowa in particular, Iowa's like a very old school caucus where you have the speeches, you stand in the corner of the gym, and if your candidate doesn't meet the 50% threshold, then there's a whole bargaining session that goes on, and you're wooed. And so
I'm against that. I'm against this based on my desire for diversity. And
you're against the change, you're against the tradition.
I'm against the change. And when I say diversity, I'm not talking about ethnic diversity. I'm talking about it's cool that we have this weird state who does things differently and that it's about community. It's like the old fashioned town hall meetings, in New England. I mean, there's something nice and special about that. Now, I'm not saying it should necessarily be the first in the nation or whatever. That's a different argument. But the idea that they're not preserving this, it's weird. I love weird. It's a weird idea that I think they should protect.
So just to make sure I'm getting this correct, I made a mistake a few shows ago. So I haven't probably corrected myself. I had said on a past show that for the Democratic debates, for the first 2 debates, if the Democrats had more than 20 who met the polling and fundraising thresholds, that it would be a straight lottery for gets the 20, and that was wrong. I misread the rule statement. It's not a straight lottery. They actually will go based on who met both thresholds, and then who has the best polling and who has the most donors. So I was wrong about that. So I apologize that I said something inaccurate earlier. This is an April story from Bloomberg.com. The tradition-bound Iowa caucuses are set to allow some online voting next year. And among the likely beneficiaries are older voters who will press candidates to focus on such issues as drug prices, Social Security, Medicare. But remember, Biden is strong with older voters, at least as of today. The plan by Iowa Democrats is for the virtual caucus meetings to generate roughly 10% of the delegates from each of the state's 4 congressional districts, no matter how many people actually participate. While remote participation could carry less voting weight than in-person caucusing, it will be a slice of the electorate that can't be ignored, said Bray Anderson, Iowa Director for AARP, quote, 10% is not small potatoes, and good campaigns will have to figure out how to turn that group out. They can't afford to ignore any voter, but a smart strategy for any candidate would be to make sure they are addressing issues important to the 50-plus demographic.
But my problem with this is that it's not going to end here, Bill. This is the slippery slope. This is where it starts.
Well, Iowa's the holdout. I mean, I don't think any other state does the caucuses the way Iowa does.
I think Utah does.
Well, the other way of caucus, I sort of they do it in that protracted style. And the Republican caucus in general never did that. They were always just, you show up, you vote, and you leave. So there's like a little bit of party business, a couple speeches, and then that's the only change. I have
a friend, and now in Utah, of course, it's different too because the LDS community, and there's like a hierarchy and all sorts of things like that. But I have a friend who lives in Utah who like went and they were going to all vote Trump, and he talked them into voting. I think it was for Rubio, but he was like literally able to switch basically the precinct, their vote. And so like that's how I think this. I think you're less likely to get a Trump when you have a more communal experience than when you have an individualistic experience.
Well, if you don't want to admit in public that you're voting for Trump, then that might be the case. He didn't win Iowa. Cruz won Iowa.
This is an opportunity for civic leaders and wise gray hairs to step up and be like, Bob, you know better than that. What about your farm? What's going to happen when those tariffs kick in? I mean, it's an opportunity, right?
I wouldn't want all of voting to be that way. Obviously, there is value to a secret ballot, but it's not a negative value to have an open conversation amongst party members in deciding on a nominee. So I don't have a problem with some contests being one way, some ways being another. You know, we have all these debates about open primaries and closed primaries and caucuses and this and that, and whether should it be early states and then Super Tuesday, or should it be a single national primary? There's no perfect way. Everything has pros and cons.
Yeah.
So I actually like the current arrangement where there's a little everything.
Yeah, it's more fun, more interesting, and so this is like. I don't want to go too deep into this, but this is like a conservative argument for diversity, which is that there should be localism. There should be weird stuff happening. Iowa should be full of a bunch of, farmers having these caucuses and like that's weird and cool. And we should preserve that. Like make that a national park. Let's preserve that. Like everything shouldn't be the same.
I mean, and I think Democrats were correct in saying, you know what, Iowa, New Hampshire, these are very white states. We can't have 2 white states calling all the shots. We need to move up Nevada and South Carolina and diversify these early contests before we get to the Super Tuesdays. And I think that's worked very well. We haven't had, Iowa does not always determine who the winner is going to be. Often Iowa and New Hampshire don't go the same way.
Well, and Iowa went for Obama, too. Let's not forget that.
Well, Iowa's an example where that definitely catapulted Obama.
Big time.
And it catapulted John Kerry in 2004. It didn't help Tom Harkin in 1992 because it got written off as a favorite son deal. Gephardt was Iowa in 88. That didn't help him
because he moved there.
Because Dukakis won New Hampshire. And you often have splits. Obama won Iowa, but Hillary won New Hampshire, and that made it, a longer race. So it's very possible that Iowa and New Hampshire split, and that makes Nevada and South Carolina more important. But certainly if Biden lost Iowa, you can't be confident he's going to win New Hampshire, even though he's polling well right now.
So this change that you were talking about in Iowa, are you suggesting that this could hurt Biden, or are you just saying it?
Well, the change will be better for Biden. If you get more older voters who don't have to go stay in the gymnasium 2 hours, that's better for Biden.
Wow. Okay, that's interesting.
But the challenge is to organize that community and make sure those folks actually, do what they want. It's still a new thing for them to do. There's no tradition of doing it, so you got to get people going to.
Are old people on the internet in Iowa? I guess on AOL.
All the old people I know are on the internet these days. So,
well, of course, who do you think's spreading all the crazy fake news memes?
Right.
Come on.
But as far as polling Iowa, I think this makes it extremely difficult to know exactly what's going on. I mean, Iowa's always pretty tough to poll anyway.
Yeah.
This makes it much, much harder.
And by the way, let me just say a quick aside. But 10 years ago, I worked for AOL's Politics Daily, which was sadly destroyed by the Huffington Post. It is no longer. All my stuff is gone. It's missing in action. But I worked for AOL, and if they put one of my columns on the AOL homepage, it was like getting a drudge link in terms of the traffic. I'm not exaggerating. There were all sorts of people back then, 10 years ago, who would apparently had their desktop set to AOL. Like that was when they went on the internet. That came up, and they would have to click on my story, and it was unbelievable, the traffic.
Let me shift a little bit to the other Democrats, because I just saw the latest Morning Consult weekly tracking poll. We've had a lot of Warren buzz lately, and Warren definitely
gaining acceptance in the polls.
I mean, she's definitely gone off the mat. She's definitely clearly top three. I think she's largely edged ahead of Harris by a little bit. So most polling, top three is Biden, Bernie, Warren. And there's the possibility that she could even eclipse Bernie and be the main Biden populist alternative. But this is, granted, it's just one poll, but it had Bernie at 20 and Warren at 9. And she hadn't moved at all from the past week. Bernie gained 1 point, Biden lost 1 point. It was by and large, the same as it was. And in particular, the poll showed that Warren was doing 4 points better. She was 10% with whites and 6% with African Americans. And the only other candidate, Biden's a little better with African Americans, with non-whites than whites. I believe Bernie's about the same. Kamala is about the same. Maybe a little better with non-whites. The only other candidate with a real racial gap that skews white is Buttigieg, which is, I think it's even more stark with him than Warren. And it's not just.
It's also like socioeconomic, I think, too.
Both Warren and Buttigieg skewed towards college-educated white voters. Bernie, Biden are better with non-college. So both Warren and Buttigieg are appealing to a niche of the Democratic electorate. And it's been talked about a bit more with Buttigieg because you go to a crowd and it's all white. Warren has a more robust part of her stump that's targeting African-American voters. She has had plaudits from African-American activist leaders. So she went to an event called She the People in Texas, where she had a great response from a diverse crowd. But these are not a cross-section of African-American voters. These are activist leaders. So even though she's getting a lot of credit, more credit than Bernie has gotten. Bernie still gets knocked for not having a good part of some African Americans, even though he's tried. It's not like he doesn't talk about it. But Warren's got more credit in the press. Bernie's numbers are better with non-whites than Warren's is. And I'm not saying that can't change. I mean, maybe that she, like everything with Warren, maybe she's just 1 foot in front of the other. She's going to gut it out, bit by bit. She's going to make inroads.
She's Bill Buckner.
That could well be the case. But certainly as it stands, the reason why she's not fully breaking out, and same with Buttigieg, is that their appeal has been limited to college-educated whites by and large.
Yeah. How important do you think it is? I saw there was a piece somewhere about Biden's having hired a lot of African American staff in senior positions.
Well, most notably Simone Sanders.
My former CNN colleague. How important do you think that is? And she was with Bernie last time.
I don't know if the staff is critical. I mean, I don't know what's happening in the inner sanctum, if they've given him direct advice that he's adopting and that's helping him. I think it's much more about just his stature. One, stature as Obama's vice president. I think that goes a long way. And the general familiarity. I don't think you can put it all on name ID. Bernie's name ID is as good as Biden's. Now, that might be why Bernie does as well as he does with non-white voters. I mean, I think, but his appeal in general skews young. And so I believe what non-white sport he has also skews young and Biden's skews old. But if it was just name ID, Bernie and Biden would be tied because their name ID is equivalent. It's that Biden's name ID is connected to being a popular vice president for a popular former president. And so when you attack Biden for his past, Biden was against busing in the 70s and Biden was not for Roe v. Wade in the 80s. I think most voters, older voters, say, so what? I saw him as Obama's BP, and he was not racist, and he was not sexist, and I trust that this is where he's at today.
This reminds me a little bit of how we thought we had Trump dead to rights over whatever. You name the position or name the thing he said. If people find out where he is on tariffs, it's going to be alone. Right. I mean, I'm not saying that two things are completely equal, but I do think that there is a sense that, this is going to totally if people find out this about him, about his record, about what he said 25 years ago, this is going to be the silver bullet.
Well, but the problem with the Trump electorate, the Republican electorate, is the same. It's a misread of the electorate. The assumption that the electorate was doctrinaire ideological conservative was a misread of where the Republican-based electorate actually was.
Yeah. And part of that's part of that is obvious, but part of that I think is the whole woke Twitter problem that on the Democratic side, progressives, probably white progressives, whites for some reason tend to be more progressive, I think, than the Democratic electorate are overrepresented.
Whites are more self-identified as liberals than African Americans. That's just a statistical fact.
And they're overrepresented on Twitter.
Yes.
And I think that's a big part of the story.
Yeah.
Not original to me, but obviously.
And it may be that, these are the activists, these are the active people, and therefore they'll carry some more weight. And, and that is true in caucus states. Or Bernie did better in caucuses than primary states, but that only gets you so far.
But I think there's I hear what you're saying, Bill, and you may be right, but I think that there's a difference between an online activist and a grassroots activist, and the problem I'm talking about is sort of weighting too heavily the online activist.
Oh, I completely agree with that. But I think there is overlap between the online activist and the grassroots activist.
Nowadays.
And the fact that that gives you a certain amount of enthusiasm and, volunteer support and small donor support. I mean, that's not nothing. But there's a reason why Bernie's caucus strength was not as determinative as Barack Obama's caucus strength in 2008. He did better in caucuses than Hillary Clinton did, but Obama also had near universal African-American support. So once you marry your college-educated white liberal with nearly every African-American voter, that's a powerful coalition. Bernie did not have that. And it seems, at least at this juncture, if anyone's going to dominate African-Americans, right, at least right now, it's Biden. Now, maybe, Kamala wins Iowa, maybe that changes. But we are not seeing out the African-American vote behave in a monolithic fashion. I mean, Biden's doing very well. He's getting about half of the non-white vote, but it's not 80, 90%. And Bernie's getting a chunk, and, Kamala has a piece, and Warren has a small piece, and there you have it. If a person of color breaks out of the pack, maybe that changes, but it would not be surprised to see Biden hold on to that because he does have that Obama halo. He does have African Americans who, one, saying, hey, I respect you for being by Obama's side, and that goes a long way with me, and I'm a fundamentally more pragmatic voter than the college-educated white liberal, and I have more confidence you're going to deliver on what you say. You're not overpromising, you're not pandering to me, and I've seen you deliver in the past. So that also goes a long way with me.
Absolutely.
Now, again, I don't want to put myself out here as the spokesperson for the African American voter, because I'm certainly not that. I'm just giving you what I am surmising from what polling data that I see and what anecdotal reporting that I see.
Nobody is more urban than you. Nobody keeps it real more than Bill Scher. You're being shy here.
Before we wrap up, what did you make of Trump's Japanese trip, both in the way he went after Biden and in the way he seems to be potentially shivving John Bolton? So on one hand, he's being the usual bombastic, crazy Trump, siding with Kim Jong-il and essentially appealing to Kim Jong-il, help me take out Biden. Maybe he's sending me a signal. But he's also sounding like a anti-war liberal in denouncing regime change towards Iran, and severely undercutting everything Bolton was clearly trying to do in trying to get us on a war footing with Iran.
Well, it's nothing new, though. He did the same thing to Tillerson. How quickly we forget.
But Tillerson was moving towards a diplomatic approach to North Korea.
Right, he undercut him, but for different reasons, right. for opposite reasons.
And Trump was mad that he wasn't butchering his fire and fury rhetoric. He ditches Tillerson. He then follows Tillerson's approach on North Korea. He hires a more militaristic national security advisor. He seems to give him a relatively long leash in Venezuela, which they botch. And maybe Trump in general strikes me as someone who doesn't want to start a war anyway. He wants to be known as a deal maker, not a warmonger. But he gives them some leeway in Venezuela. They screw it up, and that's and Biden and Trump seemed to be venting in private. They were trying to drag me into a war here, and now he seems to be more vocal and saying, "You're not going to do this to me in Iran." Even though, you go back to Trump in the beginning of the presidential campaign, his first comment about Iran to Chuck Todd was, I don't like that Iran deal, but I'm going to police that deal. Yeah. Because I'm a deal maker. You got to respect the deal. You can't just walk away from a deal.
I wouldn't sign it, but I'll make them live up to the letter of the law.
Right.
Believe me, this is not going to be good for them.
Right.
Yeah.
Then after getting some blowback to that, he recognizes, okay, the Republicans don't want to hear that kind of talk, so I'm going to go trash this deal the way the rest of the conservatives do. So he trashed it throughout the campaign. He goes to AIPAC and he trashes it. And then he actually pulls out of it as president, but you're starting to see him sort of inch back to where he has always wanted to be, which is the deal maker.
I don't know who he is. I don't know there's no coherent worldview, philosophy. It oscillates, and that's the funny part about the Trump sycophants, because they can't, by definition, they can't really have a consistent worldview either, right? I mean, they're for what Trump's for. That's the consistency. But I don't really understand what he's doing or what's going on.
At least I don't think he's a good deal maker. He's not actually achieved a real deal with North Korea. But I think he wants people to see him as having brought peace and prosperity and not war. So, even if he doesn't get, the ink signed on the North Korea deal, he will probably go into the 2020 election saying, we were at the verge of war with North Korea and I ended that, now we have peace.
Well, I think he is very lucky in so many ways. And I think his erratic, unorthodox behavior could have some positive externalities, like unintentional. It's sort of like remember in the movie Bull Durham when Kevin Costner tells Nuclear Lelouch to throw at the mascot, to hit the mascot, because you want the batter to think you're crazy, or
which just happened last night, apparently at the first pitch of an Orioles game.
Did it really hit the bird?
No, someone did the first pitch, and she botched, and she hit the cameraman right in the face. Right in the camera.
It's clear if it hit the bird, because the bird's got padding. You know?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, the cameraman, that's not good. But anyway, there may be something. Trump gets lucky, and the erratic nature freaks people out. There could be some good things to come out, or it could lead to a nuclear war. I mean, it could go either way.
Well, I don't have a lot of praise for Trump's erratic behavior. I don't really think that's served him all that well. I will say this for Trump: he has killed a lot fewer people than the George Bush administration. He has not launched into a total ludicrous war necessarily. What's that?
Has he killed fewer people than Obama?
I haven't the body count there. Obama was involved in the Libya intervention. Hey, he did have
speaking of, I need to read up on this. This John Walker Lindh. What's the guy's name?
John Walker Lindh. Yeah.
There's a Steve Earle song about him.
Yeah.
Why are we letting him out?
I mean,
why is he getting out?
He's served his sentence. I mean, this is not an act of charity. He wasn't convicted for murder. He was convicted for aid to a terrorist organization or something like that.
Let me just stop you there, because I'm vehemently against all this talk of the traitor talk that Liz Cheney and everybody's talking about. But isn't that actually, wasn't he literally a traitor? I mean, you certainly can make the case. He wasn't convicted for treason. He was convicted, I think, like an aid to an enemy. There's a different definition of the law. Forgive me, I don't know off the top of my head. And he plea bargained and got a 20-year sentence. And he is getting out 3 years early for good behavior. Apparently, just following the rules of prison. Didn't do anything in prison. Is he going to be on the streets in America?
I mean, he will be a free person. I mean, he can't travel outside the country. He had gotten Irish citizenship, but they told him he can't travel, and he can't be on the internet unless he's using English. So there's some weird elements to his release.
I wonder if he can go on TV, or I'm just throwing it out there. Maybe he could do a podcast. I don't know.
I'm not sure about that. Those are the things that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
And there's some evidence that he, because there was an argument at the time that he was sort of wrong place, wrong time. Never really was a terrorist. But there's some evidence that he has expressed support for the Islamic State while in prison. There was a written exchange he had with Graham Wood at the Atlantic, where it's just slightly short.
Is Graham a DMZ watcher?
I don't know.
Okay.
You're thinking about Graham Weiss, who's a DMZ superfan. We love.
Maybe I'm thinking of Graham Parsons. Anyway, one of the Grahams likes us.
And he was trying to get John Walker Lindh's help to translate a text, and the prison wouldn't let him do that. And Lindh was like, "You should just go to the caliphate and ask them." And then Graham was like, "I think I'm worried about being kidnapped and beheaded." And Lindh was like, "Oh, well, those journalists, they didn't follow proper protocol with the Islamic State. I'm sure if you talk to the Islamic State leaders, they will treat you very nicely." So it's not quite I am expressing my allegiance to the Islamic State, but he's sure talking about them in a very charitable, genial fashion, which raises an eyebrow. So, but can you prosecute a guy for that? Is that against the law to say that? Yeah, not really. So, that's why he's getting out. And so
has Trump? I can see this Trump being has Trump spoken about this yet? Shouldn't Trump be stopping this from happening? Why are we letting this guy out?
I don't know off the top of my head if he's said something verbally or not. He might have said something, but it was not like Bo Bergdahl, where he went off on a total tirade against the Obama administration. But
that one's arguably more deserved.
But people talk about being in a martial law dictatorial state. Trump does not have the power to stop this release. He is not in control of the situation.
Was it Obama's? I'm not a dictator. I can't just It's not my fingers.
Right.
Do the Dream Act.
So I think this guy's going to be watched very closely. I don't think he's going to go, and I don't think the NSA is going to, say have a good life. They're going to keep their eyes on him. But this is always a tricky thing when you are convicted of something terrorist related that is not murder. It's generally not a life sentence, and you get out.
The TSA security check is going to be hell for him.
Yes,
going forward.
Well, he's not flying anywhere. At least not, above board. If he does something domestically, there will be a whole lot of incriminations. But really, there's nothing you can do. He had the plea bargain. He served his time, and he got out. That's the end of it.
But you're an alt country fan.
I am.
So Steve Earle had a song about this guy, the ballad of Johnny Walker. I forget. Anyway, what did you think of that song? And is there going to be a sequel now?
Well, I gotta say, at the time, I liked the song, and I was partial to the argument that it was wrong place, wrong time. Yeah, and he was treated badly. I mean, there was a photo of him where he's like, he's restrained and he's bound, he's blindfolded. It looks like an Abu Ghraib type photo, except it was before Abu Ghraib. So when the photo came out, no one flinched. Yeah, screw that guy. And that definitely, rankled me that we treated somebody in that way. And even if he's the worst terrorist, I would still be rankled by. That's not how we should treat people. We should not be like them. We should be better than that. And you wondered, was this guy someone who just, got on the wrong path and got with the wrong people and got into a bad situation? But I have to say, what I have read about some of these communications, does make me wonder whether I got that wrong, or whether he was definitely deeper in than we realized at the time, or that some argue at the time. But there's also the question: do we make him worse? Was he not all the way there when we put him in jail? And because the way we treated him, he became more radicalized. I can't know the trajectory because I only get dribs and drabs of information.
It's like there's an episode of 30 Rock where Liz Lemon. It's like see something, say something. Liz Lemon reports her neighbor.
Yeah, and he was trying to get into the American Race reality show, Amazing Race.
And then she radicalizes him.
Right.
I just think maybe stick to Copperhead Road or
Guitar Town. Guitar Town is still the best Steve Earle CD.
I got a 2-pack habit and a Motel Tan.
Yeah.
Are there better is there a better line than that? I don't think so.
I mean, Guitar Town is just good, start to finish. That is just one of the perfect CDs.
Well, this is I think we end it there.
Okay.
That's a success.
Fair enough.
Good job.
So what do you got to plug?
Well, I interviewed on my pod, since we talked about this, I interviewed, there's a documentary out called Mosul, about Mosul, and I interviewed on my podcast, Matt Lewis in the News, the director of that. Also, my interview, my much anticipated and adults only video interview with Bridget Fetisi, former Playboy sex columnist, is coming out. Probably going to drop today. That'll be on YouTube and on iTunes. And I'll tweet out some videos of that. And, of course, you got to read my argument, Justin Amash for president, at the Daily Beast.
You're on the cutting edge.
I am leading a movement.
You're buying low and selling high.
I'm going to be press secretary for Justin Amash.
You heard it here first.
How about you? What's cooking?
Well, I did write my anti-impeachment column over at Real Clear Politics on Monday. The political case for impeachment does not hold up. You're talking about the politics of the impeachment, not the substance of impeachment, the substance of the criminal case against Trump. I'm not getting into just the politics of it. Check it out at realclearpolitics.com, and I will talk to you next week.
All right, Bill Scher. Follow us on Twitter at DMZ Show, and we'll see you guys later.
Take care.